Hello everyone. In this video I'm going to be talking about photosynthesis. Now this is an area that many students ask me about and find quite tricky to understand. So what I'm going to do in this video is explain everything you would need to know about photosynthesis, but at key stage 3 level. Now in key stage 3 you do the basics of photosynthesis. So we're thinking years 7, 8, 9. When you get to GCSE, or you're doing years 10, 11, typically, there's an extra level of detail because you look at experiments done to prove photosynthesis. So you look at Val Helmont and Priestley as notable scientists in this field. But then at A level and IB, so at key stage 5, photosynthesis is one of the most difficult topics to teach because it's quite involved. So this video is specifically aimed at key stage 3. Everything you need to know about photosynthesis for year 7, 8, 9. That's what this video is aimed at. I'm going to do videos for the other year groups too, but this one is for the key stage 3. Okay, so let's start right at the beginning. Organisms like you and I, so humans, we get food just by eating. We consume foods. That's what we do. We either in a food where we will eat a consumer as a source of nourishment, or we could just go to the fridge and get some food that way. That ultimately is how we get our food. That's how we get our nutrition. But plants, they are what are called producers. They produce their own food. That is what they need to do. And that is what this word refers to. Photosynthesis is the method by which plants produce their own food in the form of sugars. Photo means light, synthesis means make, so it's using light to make food. Now photosynthesis happens in the leaves, and that's why I've got this picture of the tree here. We're going to take one leaf and we're going to look at it in a bit more detail. Now, first of all, what we need to do is put a word equation in place. So a word equation to represent the process of photosynthesis. So the plants need carbon dioxide. They also need water. And what they go to produce is glucose and oxygen. That's what they need and that's what they make. Now the things that they need, carbon dioxide and water, collectively we refer to as the reactants. And the glucose and oxygen, collectively we refer to as our products, because that's what we get at the end. Now, you do require two other things, and they're often written over the arrow, in fact, in this reaction. Sunlight is one, and chlorophyll is another. So we're going to explain why I've written those two over the arrow. In fact, let's just put in a symbol equation also to represent this process. So CO2 plus H2O, which is water, gives C6H12O6, which is the formula for glucose, plus O2. And if you want to balance the equations, all you need to do is put a 6 there, and a 6 there. In another video I explain how to balance chemical equations, but we're just going to have it set out like this. So carbon dioxide and water make glucose and oxygen. Now this process is critical for the plant. The plants take in the carbon dioxide, the waste gas that we produce when we respire, and they make their own food, glucose and oxygen, which is released from the plant that we use to breathe. So without the trees and the plants, basically, we would die. The oxygen that we inhale comes from the plants photosynthesizing. So that's why that's really important. There is a really nice link between photosynthesis and respiration, which we're going to come on to shortly. Now, I'm not in this video talking about the structure of a leaf and how the cells are adapted to perform their function. I've already done a whole video called Structural Adaptations of a Leaf, which I really recommend watching after this one, because I've taken that topic and done it as a separate sort of tutorial. In this, I'm just going through the basics of photosynthesis. So let's say now we've got our glucose, we've got our oxygen. Let's think about how these actually get into the plant. Carbon dioxide will diffuse into the leaf on the underside through what are called stomata. They're little holes on the underside of the leaf. So carbon dioxide will get in to the plant through these stomata. Water will get in via the roots, or more specifically what are called root hair cells. They're sort of cells with elongated parts coming from the roots, designed to maximise surface area for absorption of water and minerals. So water will come in through the roots, it will go up the plant, it goes up the stem, and it goes through a vessel called the xylem. We'll just put that down here, L-E-M. It's a bit like the veins in our body. The xylem are tubes that carry that water to the leaf. So that explains where the carbon dioxide comes in. That explains how the leaf will get its water. Because photosynthesis is going to happen in the leaf. It's going to happen in a cell called the palisade cell. So we need to get the carbon dioxide and water to that palisade cell. Now sunlight, well, the sunlight's just going to come in and hit the leaf, and it's going to pass through the layers, through the top wax cuticle, through the upper epidermis to the palisade cell. And the chlorophyll is a pigment contained in a little part of the cell called the chloroplast. So if we just draw, I'm just going to roughly draw it to the side here. In the leaf you have these palisade cells. They're long and thin, and they're packed full of chloroplasts. There's a nucleus in the middle, cytoplasm, vacuole here. So I do talk about the structure of the cell in the other video. But these structures here, they're called chloroplasts, and they contain this pigment called chlorophyll, which traps sunlight. It's around the outside. Not the best sketch at all, but this is representing a cell wall around the outside, and those little black dots are our chloroplasts that contain the chlorophyll. And you'll find this cell, this palisade cell, in the upper part of a leaf. So basic equation, carbon dioxide and water using the sunlight and chlorophyll to make glucose and oxygen. Now this is our starting point for the topic. What we're going to do is look at that glucose that the plant has made, because it doesn't all stay as glucose within the plant. It gets converted to starch. Starch is the way that glucose is stored in the plant, because starch is smaller, it's more compact, so it's easier to store. But also it's insoluble in solution, so it doesn't dissolve and move away from the storage site. So it's more advantageous for the plant to store away some glucose as starch. It can use that glucose for many, many different purposes, which we'll talk about first. And then we're going to look at the starch and say how we can actually test to see if starch is present. And then we're going to look at the link between photosynthesis and respiration. First of all, let's think about the uses of glucose. Because the plant's photosynthesized, it's made all of that glucose, but it's not going to just suddenly use it all for food as a respiratory source. So what we'll do is we'll put glucose here, and we'll explain what that glucose can be used for. So you can actually turn that glucose straight into fats. You can use it and turn it into fats, and I'm thinking those fats you could then use for making cell membranes, because cell membranes are made predominantly of fat or lipid. But also you could use it to make liquid fats like oils that are often stored in seeds. So we'll put here, you can use it to make oils. That glucose could be used to make cellulose. And you might recall that cellulose is needed to produce cell walls. So I'm actually going to put that one in black because that is really, that's quite a critical use of glucose. Those cell walls are needed for structural support, so that's an important use of the glucose. The glucose that you make in photosynthesis could be stored away as starch, and it's stored in tubers and seeds and some special organs like potatoes. You could use the glucose to actually make other sugars. So you convert it into sucrose, for example, which will go into making fruits. You could respire some of the glucose. All living organisms need to respire to produce energy. So one of the things that the glucose could be used is for the plant in respiration. Now they're the main uses of glucose, but there is another one that's really important that must get mentioned, and that's the use of glucose to make amino acids. Now mineral salts like nitrates are absorbed by the soil, or absorbed from the soil rather, as well as water by plants. So plants will take up the water in the soil, but also minerals like nitrates that are within it. And they have nitrogen inside them, which are needed to convert glucose into amino acids. So you can only get glucose going to amino acids via the use of the nitrogen from the nitrates in the soil. Those amino acids are used to make protein. And the reason I'm just highlighting this point is because protein, as you might know, is needed for growth. So in this case, for cell structures and enzymes, it's essential that some of the glucose that you make in photosynthesis is used to make protein, because the protein will be used to make cellular structures and all the enzymes that the plants will require. So that's how we can use some of the glucose, and we're going to pick up just on this here, the starch. If you take a leaf, just a very basic leaf, a very rough sketch of one here, just add a bit of colour just to make it a bit more realistic looking. So we have a leaf there, and we want to test to see if there's starch present. Now what you can do is put that leaf in boiling water for about 3 to 4 minutes, and what that will do is just break down the cellular structures. It will break down the cell walls, membranes, to allow basically our starch to be released. If we think that a plant has been photosynthesizing in the light, it will have starch grains within its cytoplasm. So we need to break down the cell walls and the membrane to expose that starch. So you then take the leaf, if you would say do this in the classroom, having boiled it in ethanol, boiled it in water, and then put that leaf in about 5 centimetre cubed or so of ethanol. Now what the ethanol does is decolorize the leaf. It takes away the green sort of colour that you get from the chlorophyll pigment, so that you can easily detect the starch, because you won't be able to with that green pigment. So you then put the leaf in ethanol, leave it a couple of minutes to decolorize, and if you were to put the leaf in ethanol in a test tube or boiling tube, you can then leave that in a beaker of boiling water for a couple of minutes. You then remove the leaf, place the leaf into a Petri dish, just like so. You put the leaf on a Petri dish. And you add a few drops of what's called iodine. Now, iodine turns bluey black when starch is present. So it's the chemical test for starch. So if you drop using a pipette a little bit of iodine on this leaf, you'll be able to see if the regions in the leaf sort of turn bluey black, sort of dark coloured, then those particular regions have starch present. And it's a way that we can, in a classroom, see if that leaf has been actively photosynthesizing. So that's just a little bit about the test for starch. What I want to finish with in this video is explain the importance of photosynthesis in relation to respiration. So for this, we're going to have a clean slate, and we're going to look at how you can actually test for photosynthesis in relation to respiration. Now, first of all, what I want to do is put the equation down for photosynthesis, which we had before. So we said that carbon dioxide and water in photosynthesis will produce glucose and oxygen. Now that's the formula for photosynthesis. If I underneath in red put the formula for respiration, you should notice something quite striking. The formula for respiration almost seems to be the reverse of that for photosynthesis. So photosynthesis is at the top and respiration is at the bottom. So we have photosynthesis at the top here and respiration at the bottom. Now, humans do not photosynthesize, but we respire, clearly. But plants do both. Plants photosynthesize and respire. And it's a balance between when they would do both. Because it always will need to respire to produce energy. It just depends on whether it's going to photosynthesize more or less than it does respire. Now, there's a little experiment you could do where if you take a beaker, and in that beaker put in 2 test tubes, the beaker's just to really hold them. In both tubes, we're going to have some pondweed. Put a piece of pondweed into both tubes. A good one to use in the classroom is Alodia or even Kabomba plant. So we're going to put in some pondweed. Now there's an indicator, special indicator, that we're going to add to both tubes. Now, one of those tubes rather, we're going to leave exposed to the light. We'll have this one on the left. And the other, we're going to wrap completely in silver foil to represent the darkness. And we're going to leave both tubes in that beaker for 15 minutes. And we should see something really interesting emerge after those 15 minutes. Now, in terms of that indicator actually turns 2 colours. It will go purple when there's less CO2. So when the CO2 level falls, the indicator actually turns purple. Or that indicator will go yellow when the amount of CO2, carbon dioxide, has risen. So after 15 minutes, you can monitor the colour of the indicator. And what you should see is that the plant that has been exposed to light will make use of that light and photosynthesize more than it respires. Now, if you have a look at the process of photosynthesis, I use blue or purple rather to represent this. In photosynthesis, we are using up carbon dioxide. So if the plant is doing photosynthesis more than respiration, because respiration actually produces CO2, carbon dioxide, if we're doing the process that uses carbon dioxide up, then in the light we will photosynthesize, we'll use up that carbon dioxide, so the carbon dioxide level should fall. So the indicator here in this tube exposed to light should turn purple. The plant will still be respiring, but not as much. In the darkness, and that's what the silver foil represents, in the darkness there clearly is no light, so the plant isn't going to be able to photosynthesize quite like it would do normally. But it will still be respiring, so it's going to be respiring more than photosynthesizing. So if it's respiring more than photosynthesizing, it's going to end up producing more carbon dioxide than it would be taking it in. So when it respires, it's going to produce a lot of CO2. It's going to respire more to do so. And so the indicator should go inside here. I mean, I'm doing it over the silver foil, but the indicator in here should go yellow because the CO2 level should rise. In the darkness, the plant will respire more than photosynthesize. When you respire more, you produce more carbon dioxide, so the indicator turns yellow. There is a point in real life when the rate of respiration almost is equivalent to the rate of photosynthesis, and actually the amount of CO2 coming out of a plant, being released by a plant, is the same as the amount of CO2 coming in. Now, when that point is reached, we call that the compensation point. So that's called the compensation point. But this was just to explain the test for photosynthesis and the link between that and respiration, and the fact that plants do both. Now, the only bit I've missed really in this video is something about limiting factors, which is roughly taught in Key Stage 3, but you don't really use that information as much until you get to Key Stage 4. So I'm going to include limiting factors in my photosynthesis video aimed at Key Stage 4. But I hope all that helps.